There's a curious paradox about prosperity that most of our nation still refuses to accept. The more feverishly people chase wealth, the faster it seems to slip through their fingers. As 2025 drew its final curtain, nearly half of American households discovered they had ended the year worse off financially than they began. Not because opportunity had vanished, but because wisdom had. The ghosts of speculation, impatience, and excess once again seduced the common man into believing that fortune could be won faster than it could be earned. I have watched this play out before. The script does not change, only the actors do. In every age, the crowd believes it has discovered a new road to riches, and in every age, that same crowd finds itself standing on a familiar cliff's edge, staring at the wreckage of its own making. To those who listen carefully, the truth of 2025 was not one of lost opportunity, but of lost discipline. America did not suffer due to lack of income, but because too many mistook speculation for strategy, spending for strength, and debt for freedom. And yet, what may surprise you most is that the last mistake, the one nearly 90% of Americans still make even now, is the most devastating of all. You may recognize it in your own habits before this message ends. So, let us dissect with sobriety and candor the three greatest financial errors of our age, not to chastise, but to teach. For behind every financial wound lies a moral lesson ignored. The first great illusion of 2025 was believing that the market's reflection revealed one's own worth. Men and women stared into the glowing screens of their brokerage apps as if they were mirrors of destiny. Every rise in the S&P seemed personal, every dip an affront to their self-image. In this emotional theater, Mr. Market, that ever-temperamental creature I once warned you about, found his greatest audience yet. Mr. Market, you see, is not a villain of malice, but of seduction. Each morning he approaches with either manic excitement or deep despair, offering to buy or sell at absurd prices. Yet instead of treating him as the unstable neighbor he is, most Americans in 2025 invited him into their living rooms, into their phones, into their minds. The stock ticker became the nation's pulse, and day trading, once the province of gamblers, crept into the habits of the middle class like an addiction dressed in respectability. The rise of zero-commission apps democratized access, yes, but not wisdom. It was never the cost of entry that protected a man from ruin, it was judgment. As millions tried to time every wave of the market, they found themselves caught between greed and regret, earning less than the very index they believed they could outsmart. They traded their peace of mind for moments of adrenaline, and their long-term security for fleeting digital applause. In truth, the market was not their enemy, but their mirror. It reflected back the same restlessness that has always haunted the American investor, the refusal to be patient. There was no shortage of opportunity in 2025. What was scarce was restraint. The second great error of our time was lifestyle inflation, the quiet epidemic that follows every period of rising wages and easy credit. The irony of 2025 was that even as interest rates began to ease and job markets stabilized, Americans borrowed more and saved less. It was a year of restless consumption, of streaming subscriptions replacing savings accounts, of new SUVs in every driveway, while emergency funds vanished into thin air. The statistics are stark. Household debt in the U.S. surpassed $18 trillion, a record. Personal savings rates dipped below the levels seen before the COVID pandemic. The economy, though slowing, was not collapsing, yet the average family behaved as though tomorrow were a guarantee, not a test. They bought comfort today at the expense of freedom tomorrow. In the 1940s, after the Great Depression, families built their wealth meticulously, dollar by dollar, bond by bond. Ownership meant stewardship. Saving was not a moral virtue merely, but an act of self-respect. Yet in 2025, thrift became almost unfashionable. Social media turned wealth into a performance, not a principle. People didn't want to be rich, they wanted to look rich, and the difference between those two desires was the chasm into which half the country fell. The irony is that every great fortune begins in boredom, the quiet accumulation of small advantages repeated without glamour. But America forgot the romance of regularity. Instead, over half of households spent beyond their means, not because they were deprived, but because they confused abundance with identity. That is the second tragedy of 2025, the death of delayed gratification in a society that once prided itself on hard-earned independence. The third, and perhaps most dangerous mistake, was forgetting the timeless principle of the margin of safety, that small but invincible space between your resources and your risk. In 2025, I saw countless investors and families obliterate this margin in their pursuit of more. Instead of building savings before investing, they leveraged credit cards and personal loans to fund crypto bets, startup ventures, or overpriced real estate. Many convinced themselves they were entrepreneurs when they were, in truth, speculators with no defense against adversity. They bought rental properties financed at 7% interest, believing rents would rise forever. They loaded up on tech stocks trading at 60 or 80 times earnings, convinced AI was the future. They were right about the direction of the world, but disastrously wrong about the price of certainty. Even institutions wavered. Pension funds pursued risky assets to meet return targets. Young investors, raised in the zero-rate era, scoffed at cash reserves as lazy money. But when late 2025 brought market volatility, when bond prices fell unexpectedly and Wall Street forecast softness in consumer spending, those without a cushion were exposed. The margin of safety is not only a mathematical buffer, it is a moral one. It acknowledges that the future is unknowable.
It keeps pride from becoming peril. In forgetting that truth, Americans traded stability for excitement. The result? A nation half as secure, living twice as anxiously.
When I first introduced Mr. Market in 1949, he was already a familiar archetype, half manic, half depressive, but always persuasive. In 2025, he returned in digital disguise. He spoke not through brokers in gray suits, but through algorithms and influencers. His mood swung faster than ever, his reach broader, his charm refined through the seductive glow of technology. Social media became his stage. Every viral post about a meme stock comeback or once-in-a-lifetime opportunity was his sales pitch. The common investor, once prudent and skeptical, became the audience of a 24-hour marketplace designed to exploit attention, not judgment. The result was emotional fatigue masquerading as financial engagement. Yet, if one looked past the spectacle, the fundamentals whispered the same eternal truth. Value does not shout, it whispers. Real wealth grows quietly, like the oak tree that does not boast of its roots. The wise did not try to follow Mr. Market's moods. They let him tire himself out. They treated volatility as a friend who occasionally offered bargains, not a god demanding reaction. 2025 proved that the old lessons are not outdated, only ignored. As long as fear and greed remain part of human nature, Mr. Market will always find new ways to sell folly as innovation.
Every era of financial hysteria demands a counterbalance, a fortress built not of speculation, but of reason. For the modern investor, this fortress is not built on charts or forecasts, but on principles, enduring habits that have preserved fortunes across centuries of change. Invest, do not speculate. The line between the two may blur in good times, but its consequences remain stark in bad times. Investment is grounded in analysis, seeks adequate return, and prioritizes safety of principle. Speculation is anchored in hope and emotion. The intelligent investor of 2026 must revive this distinction like a sacred creed. Budget reality before dreams. Before chasing yield, calculate risk. Before increasing lifestyle, secure your base. The fortress of reason begins with knowing exactly what you can afford to lose and never wagering beyond that. Respect the margin of safety. Whether in equities, real estate, or personal finance, preservation comes before growth. A good investment does not merely promise return, it protects the investor from ruin. Beware leverage. Debt is not evil, but it is a demanding master. When used prudently for productivity, it can accelerate progress. When used for inflating consumption, it corrodes freedom. Measure success by serenity. In a world obsessed with boasting gains, redefine victory as sleeping well at night. When reason governs action, no panic can penetrate. The wise investor builds his fortress before the storm, not during it.
True financial security is not merely arithmetic. It is ethical. The American dream, when stripped of its clichés, was never about material excess. It was about dignity, the assurance that one's labor could yield a stable, meaningful life, free from dependence on others. Yet 2025 revealed how far the culture had drifted from that founding sentiment. Consumerism replaced craftsmanship, speed replaced substance, financial planning became entertainment rather than self-mastery. But prosperity built on spectacle cannot endure. Every market bubble, every debt crisis, every burst of inflation, these are not random calamities, but moral corrections. The market, in its cruel wisdom, eventually exposes the difference between what men deserve and what they merely desire. America stands once more at the crossroads between prudence and pride. The lesson of 2025 will fade unless retaught daily. Wealth that depends on luck vanishes with the season. Wealth that grows from discipline outlives its maker. To rebuild after folly requires not brilliance, but humility. Late 2025 was a moment of reckoning for millions of households. High-yield credit cards, student loans, variable mortgages, all squeezed tighter under the weight of overextension. But within that pain lies hope, for necessity is the mother of prudence. As we enter 2026, households that confront their mistakes honestly can rebuild faster than they imagine. The remedy lies not in new investments, but in old virtues. Save first, spend later. Seek value, not excitement. Build buffers, not illusions. The temptation will remain strong. Pundits proclaiming a new bull market. Politicians promising financial relief through policies detached from fiscal law. But dignity does not come from programs. It comes from personal governance. America's power has always been that its people, when sobered by hard lessons, return to common sense. The nation that conquered depressions, wars, and inflationary panics did so not through luck, but through the quiet courage of its households. Men and women who refused to confuse speculation with freedom. Mr. Market will knock again. He always does. He will arrive dressed in fresh narratives, whispering that this time is different. When that day comes, remember this: he is never different. Only your discipline can be. At the end of every market cycle lies the same aspiration that began the American dream, the right to live unafraid. True wealth is not the number in your portfolio, but the absence of anxiety when the world grows uncertain. It is the quiet evening when you know your bills are paid, your children are secure, and your future no longer depends on the mood swings of Mr. Market. That peace cannot be bought in a rally, nor restored in a stimulus check. It must be built, brick by brick, through integrity, patience, and unemotional reason. For the intelligent investor, calm itself becomes a form of compound interest. So, as nearly half of Americans now stand at the threshold of 2026 poorer than they were a year before, Let this be more than a statistic. Let it be a turning point. Let it mark the rebirth of the disciplined investor, the quiet worker, the saver who understands that money serves best when it serves purpose. The market will always have its booms and busts, its prophets and pretenders, but the principles of sound investing are eternal because they are human. They stem from the same virtues that built this nation: patience, prudence, and personal responsibility. In a world eager for shortcuts, choose the long road, for only there will you find the financial peace that neither inflation nor innovation can steal. That, my friends, is not just the philosophy of investing, it is the philosophy of freedom itself.